Good afternoon and welcome to the City Club of Cleveland. My name is Paul Harris and I am president of the City Club's Board of Directors. During the past year, the City Club has welcomed several speakers to its podium to address issues related to health care and wellness. Today we are pleased to inform our listeners on sleep deprivation, a problem that affects, according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, or CDC, approximately 70 million Americans. As the CDC website states, quote, sleep deprivation is associated with injuries, chronic diseases, mental illnesses, poor quality of life and well-being, increased health care costs, and lost work productivity. Sleep problems are critically under-addressed contributors to some chronic conditions, including obesity and depression, end quote. We will use a moderated panel discussion format for today's program with 3 experts on sleep as our panelists. Our panel will be moderated by Michael McIntyre, host of The Sound of Ideas on WCPN 90.3 FM Idea Stream, and a columnist for the Cleveland Plain Dealer, on whose staff he has served for 21 years. Now, I've been told that Mr. McIntyre does not get enough sleep, but he appeared to me to be well-rested and prepared for today's forum, so he will proceed to introduce our panelists, and we'll get right into today's program.
Thank you very much, Paul. You look very well rested yourself today. And the entire crowd, very well rested, bright-eyed. You're all wide awake. I want to thank you for being here for the kickoff to Sleep, a Wake-Up Call. It's a collaboration of IdeaStream, the Plain Dealer, and Net Wellness. NetWellness.org is a consumer health website from Case Western Reserve University, Ohio State University, the Ohio State University, and the University of Cincinnati. Sleep, a Wake-Up Call features television, radio, newspaper, and internet programming on the importance of sleep and the dangers of getting too little of it. And if there was an app for loading this content directly into your dreams, I think we'd do that as well. That would be part of the thing. It's my goal this afternoon to move the discussion to our expert panelists who have a lot of fascinating information about the importance of sleep. And I'm going to try to do that without actually inducing sleep. So let's move quickly. Our esteemed panel this morning is Dr. Dennis Auckley. He is an associate professor of medicine at Case Western Reserve University. Dr. Auckley is a pulmonologist and sleep specialist who directs the Center for Sleep Medicine at Metro Health Medical Center in Cleveland. Thank you for being here, Doctor.
Thank you for having me.
Very good to have you. And also with us, directly to my left, is Dr. Elizabeth Click. She's an assistant professor at the Francis Payne Bolton School of Nursing at Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland. She also spent 12 years as a workplace wellness expert at Progressive. Good morning to you, Doctor.
Thank you.
Very good to have you. And finally, Dr. Kenneth R. Casey is with us today. He is a professor at the University of Cincinnati College of Medicine. He chairs the Sleep Medicine Network of the American College of Chest Physicians and is chief of sleep medicine services at the Veterans Affairs Medical Center in Cincinnati. Hello, Doctor.
Hello.
All right, so now we have the expert panel. We know what we've got in store for us. We're going to be taking your questions in the traditional question and answer period later, and I'll have a few questions to start us off today. Sleep has been called the one thing that people like that's actually good for them. And Miguel de Cervantes in Don Quixote waxed poetically about sleep, and he wrote, "Now blessings light on him that first invented sleep. It covers a man all over, thoughts and all, like a cloak. 'Tis meat for the hungry, drink for the thirsty, heat for the cold and cold for the hot. 'Tis the current coin that purchases all the pleasures of the world cheap, and the balance that sets the king and the shepherd, the fool and the wise man, even." Sleep sounds awesome. So Dr. Auckley, beyond meat for the hungry and drink for the thirsty, medical professionals such as yourself consider it a balm for the sickly and a shield for the healthy. Why? Why is sleep so important?
Well, to play off of the quote that you just stated, sleep is extremely important. It's a vital function, just like eating and drinking. We have to have it. We have to do it. There's actually a rare condition that's very fascinating called fatal familial insomnia, in which individuals lose the ability to sleep. And when this occurs, they go through a number of stages of basically deterioration of their mind and body, and then they end up dying. It's fatal, as the name implies. So clearly we have to sleep. Why we sleep is not quite as well known. It's still a mystery, and there's a lot of work going into trying to figure this out exactly. But the importance of sleep is really becoming more and more recognized in modern society, as unfortunately modern society is de-emphasizing sleep, in part because of all the research that's coming out in the last 10 to 15 years. And a lot of this research has shown that in individuals who are not getting adequate sleep, either volitionally volunteering not to do this, or because of social or societal pressures, or they're getting adequate sleep, but their sleep is of poor quality, perhaps because of environmental conditions or very commonly sleep disorders, that they are actually suffering a number of consequences related to this. And this goes to specifically issues related to social consequences, how we interact with each other, professionalism, et cetera, to emotional, psychological problems, to actually hard core medical problems. So we're finding out that a lot of sleep disorders as well as insufficient sleep are linked directly to medical conditions that develop over time and are probably related to the lack of sleep.
Let's talk about those conditions. Dr. Casey, lack of sleep has been associated with heart attack, stroke, obesity, depression, even cancer. It really is linked to so many of those maladies?
Those data are fairly difficult to appreciate. They're statistically significant differences in epidemiologic studies. It's hard to make clear cause and effect kind of associations with those things. So we don't have very direct information about the consequences in terms of specific conditions, but overall mortality, there's no question that that's impaired by the lack of sleep. The other problem with those data is that there's a reason why people don't get enough sleep, and some of those things are comorbid conditions that may actually be associated with adverse outcomes. And so sleep lack may be a final common pathway, if you will, of a lot of other different conditions.
How much sleep is enough sleep, Dr. Click? I was mentioning beforehand I got the usual 5.5 hours.
Right.
You're saying that's not the usual. It's not a good amount of sleep. What is the right amount?
Most of what we know in reference to adults would be at least 7 to 8 hours a night. For teens, around 9, and of course for children, they end up sleeping longer periods of time. But we know that many people are sleeping less as the years have gone by. There's some studies that have shown that the average length of sleep that people are spending each night has decreased over the past 20, 25 years.
Kids don't necessarily have to sleep at night. I know teenagers sleep till about 1 in the afternoon. They're getting their sleep, though.
Right. Some, however, there are some interesting, topics of discussion when you look at school and when school starts and the sleep cycle, as you're mentioning, that teens tend to get into in terms of sleeping later in the morning, which is not generally feasible during the school day.
Right.
So the sleeping longer on the weekends and possibly then going to bed later at night may be problematic.
Well, that leads to the question then, can you catch up? So if I'm sleep deficient Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, but Friday night I get to bed at a decent hour and I can sleep in on Saturday till 10 in the morning, and I got a solid 9.5, 10 hours. Did I catch up? Is it possible to do that, Dr. Auckley?
Well, there is some information that's come out recently suggesting that that's unfortunately not the case. So
Bummer.
You need to get more
Plan
sleep.
B.
So while sleeping more on the weekends may help you feel more rested and feel better, there are actually problems with issues such as attention, vigilance, things like that, which deteriorate the longer you go with what we call chronic partial sleep deprivation. And even during recovery sleep, so at 2 to 3 days of recovery sleep, those functions don't return back to normal. So there probably is a consequence to doing this, that sort of pattern of short sleep on the weeknights, and then lengthening your sleep out on the weekends as an attempt to try and catch up. Like I said, some parameters are probably better, but many are not.
So there's no checking account of sleep. It's not like you can draw it down during the week and then make a deposit on the weekend.
So I'd need to put a little bit into the account each and every day, and that's what we've talked about earlier, is the idea of having 7 to 8 hours of sleep. So let me ask you guys, incredibly busy, you're doctors, how much sleep do you get? How much do you get on a regular night, Dr. Click?
I'm pretty good about getting the right amount of sleep. I really work hard. I try as much as I can to practice what I preach, and so 7 or 8 is probably my average, and I try hard with my children to make sure they get enough sleep too.
And I believe you.
I do.
I want everyone to be honest here, Dr. Casey.
I get the usual 5.5, 6 hours of sleep.
And how about you, Dr. Auckley?
It's generally between 6.5 to 8 hours. But, I would like to just follow up on something that was mentioned earlier, that, a lot of society is actually not getting enough sleep, as determined by some of these survey studies. But there is a fair amount of inter-individual variability in terms of the amount of sleep that you actually need. So some people do seem to do well and function with 6 hours of sleep, where others need 8 to 9 hours of sleep. And I'm talking about adults in general. So there is some variability, and most people can find that their comfort zone is really how much they need. But the concerning thing is that society in general, there's a trend towards decreasing that sleep time in just the general population.
I wonder if it matters about the kind of sleep you get. You mentioned, Dr. Click, that you have children, and I've heard it said that anyone who says they sleep like a baby doesn't have one.
Right.
Is it, what about that? You have the baby to get up with, and you have other factors that are maybe the environment that you're sleeping in that might make your sleep not as quality as it should be, or health conditions. What about that? How do we get good, solid, restful sleep?
Yeah, that can be very challenging. I mean, certainly when people are parenting younger children and have those frequent waking issues at night, that's hugely challenging, and I'm not quite sure a feasible, practical way of working around that. I think focusing on trying to have as regular sleep as possible, knowing, as Dr. Auckley said, how much sleep one needs, and trying to stick with that as best you can is really helpful. Trying to go to bed at the same time generally and waking up at the same time are some good sleep hygiene habits that are helpful. Cooler environment, low light.
Call it sleeping weather.
Yes.
Around here.
Yes.
So there really are things that you can do to sort of make sure that that it's conducive to good sleep. Is that something that you, either of you doctors, counsel your patients?
All the time.
And what specifically are the challenges that they're presenting to you? Is it that they have too many things interrupting them, or is there something all of us can take from it when we turn in tonight and put our heads on the pillow that can make us better sleepers?
There's no question that trying to create an environment that is appropriate for sleep is very important, particularly in the group of patients that we see who have chronic insomnia, because the expectation of poor quality of sleep can lead to anxiety about, worry about the quality of sleep, which leads to difficulty falling asleep. So there's a lot of vicious circles involved in the genesis of insomnia. One of the important things to do about that is to give people very specific instructions about good sleep hygiene. And one of those is creating a good environment for sleep. It's best if it's cool, dark, don't have the TV on. You'd be amazed how many people will say, well, I can't possibly go to sleep unless the television's on. And I say, well, you can't possibly stay asleep as long as the television's on, because the sound and the light flashing is, if we're doing a electroencephalographic tracing of somebody sleeping, you can see all of those things penetrating into the brain waves during sleep. So, I mean, it's just not feasible. Quiet, comfortable, decent bed, and so on. The problem is that all of those things require a certain control over your environment. And as we all know, many people in our society don't really have control over their environment. And that's one of the things that contributes to the epidemic of insufficient sleep that goes on around. If people have to work strange hours, and I know we'll talk about shift work some, but just the very environment of sleep is something that is affected by someone's socioeconomic status.
Can we adapt? If I live in a noisy neighborhood, do I become somebody that can sleep through noise? Is it something that we kind of develop, a muscle that we develop as we go along?
Not really. Studies have shown that individuals subject to even just in controlled environments doing things like a bell tone to fragment their sleep, but there's no adaptation to that over time. That will continue to fragment their sleep. So, as Ken was mentioning, having a well-controlled sleep environment is very important, but unfortunately for some, it's unachievable in a sense.
There's a bell tone I hear every morning that I always end up sleeping through, though. and that's sort of like right when you get into the meat of the sleeping, the power of it, that's when the alarm seems to go off. Is there something about that as well that like as you said, it would disrupt you if a bell was rung at a certain hour, but yet at some times it seems as though you could sleep right through that, sleep through a train, riding right through the house.
Well, that probably is interrupting your sleep, even though you may not be aware of it, and you think you're sleeping through it quietly. But that probably goes to, in part, some of your partial sleep deprivation, that you're so sleep deprived.
I told you this was.
So, well, for some individuals, so in society, as I mentioned earlier, that there is a reduction in the emphasis on sleep duration, and as individuals become more sleep deprived, they're going to sleep through those things, although their sleep is still going to be fragmented.
Now, we talked about that it's a checking account. I love that analogy, Dr. Casey, that you have your sleep checking account and you can't add to it on the weekends with a big deposit. But can you make a little deposit during the day? Can I go to work and be a little bit tired at 2 in the afternoon and go take a nap somewhere, hopefully not in the middle of the cafeteria line or something, but somewhere out of the way, you go take a nap for 20 or 30 minutes. Is that restorative, and is that something that the medical community is waking up to say, people ought to do that?
I'm less concerned about you sleeping in the cafeteria line than I am in the middle lane of the interstate.
Right, we don't want to do that either.
And that's obviously a huge issue. You can use power naps to gain temporary improvement in sleepiness. We know that sleep at a given point in time, your sleepiness at a given point in time, is determined by an interaction between how long it's been since you were last asleep. We call that the homeostatic drive to sleep. And then what time of day it is, and that's the circadian rhythm. The level of propensity for sleep varies over the course of the day. So your sleepiness at any given point is an interaction between those two factors. By taking a power nap, you can decrease that homeostatic drive to sleep. But that's not very robust. It doesn't last very long. Beating the analogy, I'm not sure that really represents a deposit to your sleep account as much as it does just an expedient way of trying to maintain alertness to get tasks done.
Is it better, Dr. Click, than a Starbucks espresso at that hour in the afternoon? Better to have a nap or a jolt of caffeine?
Well, there's some studies that have shown effectiveness of both. I mean, I tend to think the nap would be a better solution just because it's, more natural. But there are some studies that have looked at people working, for example, shift work at night, where both the nap and caffeine have been helpful. But there are more and more companies that are providing space for their employees to take a short nap or rest and relax or meditate as a way of having a nice sort of natural break and get some rejuvenation.
Is that something companies are really doing, that you could go in and say, boss, I need to go take a 30-minute nap, and they're fine with that?
There certainly are examples. Large companies, smaller ones, it's still, I think, a fledgling effort. If you look at all of the different programs that might be part of a worksite wellness program, a nap space or a quiet room probably is less frequently found. Some studies might show even just 5% of employers might offer that opportunity, but there are examples out there, some sophisticated and some just as simple as a nice quiet room where people can go and sit in a comfortable chair and have 20 minutes of nap or rest and relaxation.
Is there advice on how to approach an employer about that? Some of mine are right at the table over here at IdeaStream. But should you, if you think that is important for you and there isn't a space for that, and do you come in with the medical data, or how do you approach those kinds of changes in the way people think?
Well, I always think it's best to talk about what the benefits are to the workplace and what the employer would get out of facilitating that type of experience for their employees. And so focusing on some of the benefits that some of the research has found, even if it might not be, long-term, there is some research that looks at better creativity, problem-solving, learning, increased attention, and certainly many of those, in addition to increased productivity, that would be attractive for an employer in reference to the output that they would get from that person as a result of offering this.
Dr. Auckley, are you a proponent of the power nap?
Oh, I think in certain situations it's definitely valuable. To follow up on a point she had made about the caffeine and the napping, both have been shown to be effective. But one of the issues with caffeine, you continue to take that is going to actually eventually cause problems with getting to sleep at night because it is a stimulant, and then you're just perpetuating the whole process of not getting enough sleep. So, if there was a choice, if napping was an option, I would favor that.
We've talked about the health effects, the physical health effects, but what about your emotional well-being? Is that something that's also tended to by sleep? That really, I mean, you can be cranky, and some people say, well, you didn't get enough sleep last night because you're cranky, but I wonder if it's more than just being cranky, if it's your emotional well-being that's affected by the kind of sleep you're getting.
Oh, certainly. We all know about individuals being irritable when they're not getting enough sleep. It can cause problems, I mentioned earlier, with interactions, with professionalism in terms of interaction with coworkers, colleagues. There was also a study done last year that was very fascinating in which they looked at moral reasoning, and they subjected some military officers to sleep deprivation, and then looked at how they did with an objective measure of moral reasoning, and found that their moral reasoning significantly declined with sleep deprivation. So their ability to make moral judgments after sleep deprivation was significantly impaired.
I wonder if that would be something that certain elected officials would use as a defense. I wasn't getting enough sleep. Dr. Casey?
I'd like to expand on an issue that we talked around, and that is we said that there's a range of how much sleep a person needs. And like any other biological concept, it's a bell-shaped curve. The wings of that bell-shaped curve are actually pretty flat. So there aren't very many people who really can get by with 6 hours of sleep. There really aren't very many people on the other side who actually need 10 hours of sleep. But you ask someone, are you sleepier than you should be? And so people will say, I get enough sleep because I'm not bothered by sleepiness during the daytime. And that may actually apply to you. I don't know. But the perception of sleepiness is entirely context dependent. So if you have three individuals who had exactly the same amount of sleep, exactly the same quality of sleep the night before, one of them is an iron worker who's 65 stories above the ground walking along a steel beam. He's not going to experience sleepiness.
We would hope.
Well, if he does, then he's going to probably try to find a different line of work because you can't do that. The guy in the office building across the street that's already finished, who's sitting there at his desk working on spreadsheets all afternoon, may actually be nodding off. Unless he knows that if he gets caught nodding off at his computer, he's going to be fired. And then that becomes an incentive to stay awake. Now, the guy in the corner office who runs that floor, who had the same amount of sleep as the other two guys, may well have his feet on his desk sound asleep at the same time. So it's entirely context dependent.
What about the idea of shift work? What if one of those people was an overnight worker? How much does that affect our sleep patterns? And more, there are people that are working odd shifts and then trying to sleep during what would be the not proper hours. It's light outside. It seems like it's just not conducive to that kind of sleep. Is that a big problem that's developing?
It's a huge problem.
And, okay, so what do we do about it?
I'm sure all of us have something to contribute to that discussion, but my perspective has always been that trying to, we are designed biologically as diurnal mammals. That means that we are designed to be awake when it's light during the daytime and asleep when it's dark. And trying to work when it's light and sleep when it's dark, or sleep when it's light and work when it's dark, we're not designed to do that. And whatever you do, you're simply trying to make the best of a bad situation. It's an unnatural thing for human beings as diurnal mammals to do.
And what then about the safety issues concerned with that, with people that are driving trucks or people who are pilots and have irregular shifts? What kind of measures should be put in place then to protect them and the public? Dr. Auckley?
Yeah, there are significant safety concerns, and that's really becoming a growing issue. There's now an annual conference looking specifically at sleep and safety, and a lot of it is focused on shift workers. I think everybody's aware of the recent news about the air traffic controllers, and a couple of years ago, the pilots who overshot their destination by 150 miles, falling asleep at night. So, there's huge potential for disasters that can happen as a result of, sleeping on the job, particularly during the nighttime. But as Ken mentioned, we're really trying to make the best out of a bad situation. There are things that can be done to try and improve alertness at night, as well as improve the sleep during the daytime, but it is difficult to do. Things such as when individuals are going home, trying to make sure they're going home to a dark environment, avoiding light exposure, having a quiet house, avoiding interruptions during their sleep. Those things can help to improve their sleep quality during the daytime. And then taking these power naps perhaps before their shift work, trying to work in a brightly lit environment, which is a problem because a lot of environments, for instance, the hospital is, at night the lights go down so the patients can sleep, but the workers are all still there. And so that's really counterproductive for them in terms of alertness. And then in some situations, stimulants may be appropriate. Stimulant medication can be utilized for shift workers to help them stay awake on the job.
And that's okay, the idea of having a stimulant? It sounds to me like that would be kind of playing with fire a little bit.
Well, there actually is. The FDA has now approved a medication that can be used, a stimulant medication that's been shown in controlled studies to improve alertness at night. But one of the interesting findings, so the individuals, this was done in the hospital-based setting with medical personnel, and they felt subjectively better, they performed better at their jobs, and they felt like they weren't as sleepy, but they still were profoundly sleepy when they actually tested them at night, although it was an improvement with the stimulant medication.
Well, given the importance, did you have something to say about that, Dr. Click?
I think it's helpful to also just focus on lifestyle issues. All of these things are, very helpful, but then, daily life intervenes, and if somebody's working a shift at night and the rest of their family is not, it's all of those lifestyle factors of wanting to stay connected to family and friends and still participate in part of a regular day that one has to try to work through as best as possible.
We're coming up quickly on the traditional question and answer period, but I wanted to ask one last one before we get to that, and that is, given the importance of sleep to overall health as we've discussed it today, do you think the medical community is taking it seriously enough? Is it geared up to disseminate this information as you guys are doing, or does not everybody have the memo? Dr. Auckley?
I'll say yes and no.
Okay.
There's increasing awareness. There's growing educational opportunities. It's certainly making the news more and more. But really the medical field is still quite behind on this. There is still a lack of awareness. A recent survey that was performed a few years ago found that medical schools in general only spend about 3 hours of didactic or teaching time on sleep medicine, 3 hours out of 4 years. So it really has not become a priority. And many physicians out in practice are just not aware of the importance of sleep and sleep disorders, which we really haven't discussed in great detail, but there's clearly a ramp-up period that we're still in here with education and awareness.
So much more to talk about. You're right. Sleep disorders, apnea, all kinds of issues that I know will be addressed in the series of information that's being put out by IdeaStream,
Sure.
the Plain Dealer, and Net Wellness as well. Dr. Casey, I saw you nodding your head. You're agreeing that perhaps there needs to be more in the medical community in terms of the importance of sleep.
Very much so. I am intimidated by the notion that there's 2 minutes to talk about deficiencies of medical education in the United States. Probably won't go there.
Fire off a question about that so the doctor can expound upon that again later. But go ahead. You do.
There's
have a
not
moment or
very
so.
much, and it's been recognized as one of many topic areas. I mean, there's so many things to learn in medical school that there's a huge competition to get sort of on the agenda in medical education. And sleep medicine, despite its central importance that I hope we've been able to convey, is not a high priority in planning most medical curricula.
And how, Dr. Click, do you plan to change that?
I was thinking this morning, watching another segment on healthy living, that it could be helpful even to promote know your numbers, even in reference to sleep and length of hours that you need. You don't ever hear that kind of conversation, but there's a lot in reference to knowing what your blood pressure is, what your cholesterol is, focusing on healthy eating and all those other measures. But when you look at everything from a wellness perspective, sleep is not really a focus, and promoting enough sleep would be a good idea.
awareness first.
Exactly.
And then
educating people and really talking more about ways that they can get the right sleep that they need.
All right, I think we did a great job of I don't see anyone sleeping in the audience at this very moment. So we have succeeded, at least in the first part of our program. Now it's going to be up to you guys. We'd love to have your questions, and Paul is going to tell you how to do that.
A few announcements first. Today at the City Club of Cleveland, we are listening to a Friday forum featuring a panel discussion on sleep with sleep experts Dr. Dennis Auckley, Dr. Elizabeth Click, and Dr. Ken Casey. We'll return to our panelists in a moment for the traditional City Club questions, and would ask that you start formulating your questions now and try to keep them short and to the point so we can get as many in as possible. Members and guests alike are welcome to attend City Club forums, and we certainly hope that everyone listening will join the City Club in the coming years. We start the celebration of our 100th birthday. Our 99th birthday is this October, and we will launch that with a free speech conference, and we'll celebrate 100 years of existence and thriving in October of 2012. We welcome all of you here and those listening to WCPN 90.3 FM, WCLV, WTAM, or one of the many radio stations across the country. Our television broadcast partner is WVIZ PBS IdeaStream. Television broadcasts of the City Club are made possible by Cleveland State University and PNC, and our live webcast is supported by the University of Akron. Finally, I would like to announce that this is my last City Club forum as president, as my one-year term ends on June 30th. So one of our fine City Club traditions is a one-year term for the president. It's been a pleasure working with the board, with the City Club staff led by Jim Foster, who's at the head table, and representing this fine institution. Hugh McKay will succeed me as president beginning 1 week from today. Now we would like to return to our speaker and to our panelists for our traditional City Club question and answer period. We welcome questions from everyone, including guests. Holding the microphone today is fine City Club Program Director Kerry Miller. First question, please.
Thank you. It was really fascinating. It's a fascinating topic. My question has to do with dreams. You didn't mention the function of dreams. What is the current understanding of the function of dreams? And is there any research on content and what content reflects? And I'm thinking a little bit about things like fever dreams, which many people have experienced when they're dealing with an infection. What's the research show there?
Who'd like to take that one first? How about Dr. Casey?
Beats me. There's the history of sleep medicine really begins with an understanding or an effort to try to understand dreaming. There's been a lot of sort of back and forth about how important content is, but currently that's not really a big issue unless somebody has a very stereotyped, repetitive kind of nightmarish dream that seems to be a sign that there's some kind of a mental health issue underlying it. Otherwise, the content of dreams is not terribly important. Now, where I work at the VA, a significant proportion of the patients I see have post-traumatic stress disorder and have nightmares related to that. And every day in clinic, I hear really heart-wrenching stories of combat experiences and the nightmares that are associated with that. The good news is that there is actually an approach to management of nightmare disorder that's come out over the past few years, both in terms of behavioral therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, what's called image rehearsal therapy, as well as pharmacologic therapy that is beginning to give people with chronic nightmare disorder some relief.
I'd like to follow up with one other comment. As Ken mentioned, we really don't understand the nature of dreaming and why exactly we dream, and this is something that's been contemplated for thousands of years. You can find writings from BC about dreaming that trying to make sense of it. But one of the current thought lines, though, is that there is some data suggesting that dreaming may actually play some role in helping us to take daytime experiences and consolidate those into long-term memories, and so may play a role, important role in learning and developing long-term memories. How that happens, why that's happening, isn't entirely understood, but there have been a couple of studies suggesting that that may be a role.
I wonder how that explains the recurring dream, though, of waking up and I forgot to go to class and it's finals. Or, whatever dream you might have, that it's the constant dream you're always waking up from. It's not necessarily a nightmare, but, boy, you wish it would go away. Is it me not being able to catalog a memory properly and it keeps trying to fit into the slot?
I don't know. That's a great question.
I want an answer right now. By the way, Sound of Ideas, which is a program on WCPN 90.3 on Wednesday morning, will be dealing 9 o'clock with the whole issue of dreams, and in fact on shift work as well on Tuesday as part of this entire package. So do feel free to tune in if you have more questions about those types of issues. And now we have our next question.
I have three interrelated questions. One is, what are the physical effects of mechanical aids like a CPAP machine? Similarly, the physical effects of alcohol nightly after dinner to help get to sleep. And thirdly, what bothers me is how accurate or aware are hospital interns or firemen working a 30-hour shift?
All right, what would you like to take first? Elizabeth Click, how about if we start with you? Which one of those would you like to?
Maybe the last question, and then Dennis and Ken can certainly follow up.
And that's the long shifts, the 30-hour type shifts.
Right. I think we do know that there is less attention, less ability to perform well, and a greater likelihood of safety issues arising after very lengthy hours of work. There's been recent work to try to decrease resident hours as a result of that. And there are certain systems that have been put in place in other places to make sure that consecutive night shifts without at least a couple of days break is helpful to try to reduce some of those issues.
Yeah, the American Council of Graduate Medical Education, the ACGME, which oversees medical training, has recently restricted duty hours even further. That's been in place now for a few years, and starting July 1st, for first-year doctors in training, they will no longer be able to allow to work beyond a 16-hour shift. Doesn't limit the second or third-year doctors from working longer. Certainly doesn't limit us from working longer. But there is at least some movement and trend towards trying to improve upon that.
And is that a constant shift? Or you mentioned firefighters, and I know that if there isn't a fire and you've got everything in ship shape, you sleep. And so I wonder if in some of those other instances, like in the medical profession, you'll get a little nap in that long shift, or no, or you're on your feet the entire time.
There may be nights where there's no sleep at all.
Even if there is some sleep, though, I think it's the frequency of being awakened and, the lack of lengthy quality sleep that ends up impacting the safety and the work.
And this is a major improvement in most respects in terms of postgraduate medical education. It was not like that always. My record when I was in training was 57 hours without sleep.
And what about the question about alcohol? And an appletini a day keeps the doctor away, maybe. Is there anything to the idea of using alcohol as a relaxant and a sleep aid? I think it's actually supposed to be a stimulant, isn't it?
Yeah, well, actually, we really don't recommend alcohol as a sleep aid. While it can have some relaxing effects and may, in some individuals, help them doze off early on, the fact is that the brain goes through, as the alcohol levels drop, there's some minor alcohol withdrawal, which is very stimulating. So it tends to interrupt sleep and fragment sleep, so individuals will wake up recurrently from their sleep, whether or not they're aware that they're doing this. And really the quality of sleep is impaired.
What I tell patients is that the brain has a lot of work to do when it's sleeping. Dreaming, that we mentioned, consolidation of memory. So I tell patients that you should not go to sleep any more intoxicated than you would feel comfortable driving a car, because the brain is working just as hard trying to sleep effectively as it is different parts of the brain, but still the brain is affected by alcohol. You also mentioned CPAP.
CPAP machine, which people wear when they have apnea.
Right. We haven't even talked about sleep apnea.
Well, let's do that now.
Well, that's by far the largest percentage of patients that we see are people who have obstructive sleep apnea. So it's a very large topic. It comes about when the upper airway with sleep loses its tone. When you're awake, the muscles in the back of the throat tend to push and pull against each other, and that provides some sort of structural integrity that holds the airway open when you're awake. When you go to sleep, those muscles relax, lose their tone, and the airway becomes collapsible. I'm not going to make a snoring noise on radio or television. But when you're breathing, those muscles relax and the airway closes. That happens to a very large number of people. The estimates of what percentage of the population vary, but it's a substantial one. And it's associated with significant comorbidity. It's treated with a variety of approaches. The one that works best is called continuous positive airway pressure, CPAP. This is a mask that you wear over your nose or over your nose and mouth, whatever is more comfortable and whatever fits best. It's connected through a long flexible tube to a little machine called that has a fan that blows air in under enough pressure that it pneumatically splints the airway open and prevents it from being closed, and hopefully improves the quality of sleep, as well as prevents drops in blood oxygen, arousals, stimulation of the sympathetic nervous system, and things that we believe are the mediators of problems with high blood pressure and stroke and heart attacks and controlling diabetes, and virtually everything we look at is made worse by sleep apnea. So hopefully, this, getting directly to your question about CPAP, hopefully if it's working properly, it actually improves the quality of sleep. If it doesn't, then we need to keep working at it to try to make it fit better or work better or be better customized to the specific needs of an individual.
And is sleep apnea related to obesity or other types of conditions? Or are there things that we can do about our own health to mitigate the apnea?
Oh, yeah, certainly.
Dr. Auckley.
Yeah, certainly. As individuals gain weight, unfortunately, one of the areas that fatty tissue deposits is in the back of the throat, so it tends to narrow the airway and really predisposes it towards collapse when the muscles relax as we fall asleep. So obesity is a definite risk factor, but it's not the only risk factor, and we're recognizing more and more that individuals who are not obese may have sleep disorder breathing, and particularly in children, one of the most common causes traditionally has been enlarged tonsils, although unfortunately we're starting to see the obesity epidemic encroach even in childhood, and so that's becoming a factor with them as well. But some individuals who are thin have nasal abnormalities. They may have abnormalities of how their cranial facial structure is made up, the jaw, etc., and those things can all lead to sleep apnea in a thin individual. So.
Next question, please.
Yes, I think you've updated us on the increase in the number of hours of sleep, and I'm just wondering if there's any updates on the cycles of sleep and the stages of sleep.
What are the other stages of sleep?
Sure. The typical night in someone who's getting good quality sleep is that their sleep goes through a series of cycles, which are made up of basically light transition sleep called stage 1 or N1, and then there's a period of sort of slightly deeper sleep called stage 2 or N2 sleep that makes up usually about half of an individual's sleep over the course of the night. And then somewhere, again, depending upon age and the quality of sleep, there's often some deep sleep or slow wave sleep. We also call it delta sleep because that's the brainwave tracings that we see. And then individuals will proceed to that into dream sleep. That whole cycle takes about 90 minutes on average for an individual to go through. As the night progresses, the slow wave sleep tends to drop off and the dream sleep becomes more frequent. And so this is often why the biggest chunk of dream sleep is usually right before you awaken, which is often why you remember your dreams when you're waking up. In terms of, so that's what we know about normal individuals, but that can clearly be altered by sleep disorders, by sleeping on off-time shift work, not getting enough sleep. When you do, if you've been sleep deprived and you go to try and get catch-up sleep, you may have what we call rebound slow wave or rebound REM sleep, which those proportions of your night will be longer, more time spent in those conditions. So that's kind of the, I guess, don't know if that answers your question.
Are there a number of those cycles, and how many would you have in a single normal 8-hour sleep night?
Yeah, it depends upon how long you're sleeping, but it often ranges between 4 to 5 cycles in a night period.
And if I sleep and sometimes feel like I know I'm sleeping, again, you get that feeling that you're kind of like, I'm kind of aware that I'm here, but I'm obviously not awake. Is that lighter end of sleep? Is it?
Yeah, it can be. So initially when people are falling asleep, if you go and wake them up, they may still have some recall about their environment, things that were going on in the room, et cetera. But as they progress into slightly deeper sleep, then that disappears.
Next question, please.
Medically preferred or preferable kind of mattress?
Well, according to the commercials, you want a certain number, or you want to go to the factory, or is there a difference medically? Dr. Casey?
Not that I'm aware of.
A comfortable one.
Yes.
That's comfortable for the individual.
And that is a personal preference. I mean, some people sleep better on a harder mattress, and some want a feathered nest apparently. So you can be different. It's not one size fits all.
I think it depends on individual preference. I don't think there's really been any rigorous scientific studies to look at mattress types.
We get supporting one in their usual, position with good posture, sort of from a biomechanics perspective, is, more support with some comfort and cush is good.
What is good posture for sleeping? Is it better to sleep on your stomach or on your back, on your side? Does it matter?
I think it really is mostly dependent upon the individual and what they're most comfortable with. There are certain sleep conditions where sleep body position has a significant impact. So as Ken was talking about obstructive sleep apnea, that often is made worse by sleeping on your back. And so for those individuals, and some individuals staying off their back, sleeping purely on their sides can be highly effective. But it's difficult because most of us turn in our sleep and then we're not aware if we're on our back or on our side. So it's not routinely recommended as a therapy, but that is one instance where body position could be important.
Next question, please.
First of all, congratulations to Paul Harris on an outstanding year as president. I'd offer a round of applause.
Great job, Paul.
In the real world, we have to make choices that may mitigate against adequate sleep. One, with a lot of folks, is whether to work out, particularly early in the morning, or not. In the name of sort of a holistic analysis, if you had to make the choice between getting not enough sleep and regularly working out, where would you come out on that choice? Would you opt for making sure you get a good night's sleep, or would you opt for making sure that you work out?
Now be careful on this answer. You're going to give a lot of people,
Yes.
you could give a lot of people reason to not get up and run that 3 miles tomorrow.
The answer is yes.
Yeah, well, the answer is yes, Dr. Auckley says. How about we take a real shot at that one? What's better, sleep or
They're both important. It's very difficult. I don't know if you guys
Fit it
are
in
aware of
somewhere
any
else?
data to support shortening your sleep by a little bit to get more exercise, or avoiding exercise to get more sleep. I'm not aware of
It's a
anything.
balance piece, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, you wouldn't want to take away a number of hours of sleep, I think, maybe to exercise. But if you're shortening a little bit, to be able to do both, which we know both are helpful in
I think the
producing
other
good health.
piece to that is to look at what else you're doing that's limiting your sleep and see if there's other areas in your life that you can de-emphasize and to keep sleep a priority, as well as enabling yourself to work out.
The one really important point, though, that I'm sure we would all agree with is you don't want to do the exercise too close to bedtime. Whether it's 2 hours or 2.5 hours or whatever. Exercise is an alerting, stimulating activity that can impact how difficult it is to fall asleep. So the only thing I would say about exercise and sleep is not to do it just before bed.
And the choice isn't really just whether to wake up early. Maybe it's what you're doing before bed. Don't watch that last television program, or whatever it is you're doing. Maybe that's where you steal it from. Get to bed a little bit earlier.
Take the television program and watch it while you're working out in the morning.
Or even consider inserting the physical activity into the middle of the day when you might generally tend to experience that physical lack of energy and use that as a way to maintain good energy for the rest of the day.
In the middle of the day, right after the nap. Right? Next question, please.
Two questions, please. Would you comment on the use of over-the-counter sleeping aids like Benadryl and melatonin? And secondly, is there such a thing as getting too much sleep? Is that unhealthy?
Let's start with the medicine, the over-the-counter aids. There's many over-the-counter stimulants that people are taking now, more that mimic coffee and those kind of things. What about the opposite? What about the sleep aids? Is it a good idea to take those, Dr. Casey?
Far and away, the most commonly used sleep aid in the United States is alcohol. And we've already talked about that not being a very good hypnotic. The other over-the-counter medications fall into a couple of different, basically three main categories. One is Benadryl and related preparations. It has some benefit for 2 or 3 days, but most of the studies that have looked at Benadryl over the long term show that you begin to lose that benefit after 2 or 3 days. So it's not very effective, and it's not a very good drug to increase the dose. There have been many observations that Benadryl, particularly in the elderly population, can actually be hazardous. So it has some benefit short term, but pretty limited in its applicability. Another class is a different kind of medication that is limited by its tendency to dry out your mucous membranes, and it's not terribly effective. And then melatonin. Melatonin is a mild sleep-producing agent. It has some soporific effect. And other people may disagree with this, but I don't find melatonin itself to be very helpful as a sleep aid. We use melatonin fairly often in the clinic when we're trying to alter a patient's circadian rhythm, but it has to be given very carefully at exactly the right time, usually controlled by either measurement of core body temperature or measurement of when the patient's own melatonin peak secretion occurs. So that's really specialized to the sleep clinic. Melatonin is the signal from the pineal gland that it's dark. It tells the rest of the body it's dark out, the rest of the brain and the body that it's dark outside. If you give melatonin to a hamster, they get more active because they are a nocturnal mammal where we are a diurnal mammal. So it has about the same potency in terms of hypnotic effectiveness as turning out the lights.
One other comment regarding melatonin is it's actually not a drug. It's not regulated by the FDA. It's considered a hormone. And so it's utilized as sort of an herbal supplement, the same sort of things you can buy it in the health food stores. And more recently, the big trend, is it's being found in supplementing in these relaxation drinks like iChill and DreamWorks. And then there's also the latest craze are brownies that are laced with melatonin at actually very high doses. And these are available over the counter. You can buy them anywhere. But it's not regulated. So you really don't know exactly what you're getting in this. A study about 10 years ago looked at melatonin preparations and found that somewhere around 1/3 to 40% had minimal to no melatonin actually in them. You can actually have other things in there that may be dangerous. And melatonin itself, while generally it's safe, it can have some potential side effects and drug interactions. So it really should only be taken under the supervision of a physician who can make recommendations on specific brand names.
This is a little more basic, but what about a warm glass of milk? Does that really work? They say drink a warm glass of milk and you'll go to sleep. I can't imagine drinking a warm glass of milk, so I have no idea, but you're nodding your head like it does, Dr. Casey.
I don't know about the warmth of the milk, but milk contains a variety of compounds, including tryptophan, which is an amino acid which is associated with some soporific effect.
I think the warmth can help in terms of relaxation.
So anything warm, really.
Mm-hmm.
In the transportation field, whether you're a trucker, airline crew, railroad crews, you can work a certain number of hours. At that point, you can no longer work.
you're given a rather short time off, 6 to 8 hours, at which you can be called back to work. Given your comments about the necessity of 7 to 8 hours sleep, are our rules about transportation workers adequate to ensure public safety?
It's definitely a growing area of concern. And there has been a movement in some areas, certainly in the trucking industry. I believe now the regulation is 10 hours off between, I think they have a 14-hour work limit per day, and they have to have 10 hours off between shifts, and then there's so many hours per week they can work. So that's been in place in part of recognizing the impact that sleep and fatigue are having on traffic accidents, particularly involving long-haul truckers. In other industries, regulations aren't firmly in place, although things are starting to change. I think there has been a reaction resulting from the air traffic controllers, and there will be some regulations coming out regarding that. But I think there's still a number of areas, in the medical field, we've talked about that as well, a number of areas that still need to be looked at.
And are we done with questions? Yep, thank you. Thank you, guys. And
Today at the City Club of Cleveland, we have been listening to a Friday forum featuring a panel discussion on sleep with sleep experts Dr. Dennis Auckley, Dr. Elizabeth Click, and Dr. Kenneth Casey. Thank you very much to our panelists. Thank you, Mr. McIntyre, for moderating. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us today. This forum is now adjourned.
For information on upcoming speakers or for podcasts of the City Club, go to cityclub.org.